We are gluing and screwing in today's video. Don't flag me for that, okay? Hey everyone, I'm back for another model railroad how-to video, and today we're going to talk about building benchwork. Benchwork is really a first step in model railroading, right? You need to build something, a table of some sort in which to put all your models. And if you are new to model railroading, this step in the process can be a little intimidating, especially if you haven't built anything before. So hopefully through the tools and techniques that I show you in today's video, you'll get an idea of just how simple and easy building benchwork can really be. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I wanted to do is talk to you a little bit about tools. I have what is in front of me, what I consider kind of like basically everything you need to build your model railroad benchwork. You don't really need anything fancier than this, and with what you see right here, you can get it all done, and you can get really great results. First thing you'll need is something in order to cut all your wood up with, right? I use a cordless circular saw. This is just battery operated, battery powered, and it works. It's covered in sawdust right now, so you can see I've used it quite a bit. It works very, very well. It can be a little bit dangerous just wielding a cordless circular saw like this, but you're able to get really nice cuts through most of your wood with a good circular saw. Some people use table saws as well. That's a really great way to go. I don't have a table saw personally. I had to choose kind of between circular saw, table saw. What do I go with? Circular saw I think is a little more flexible. The one downside with the circular saw is it's not quite as easy to make perfectly straight cuts. However, you can get pretty darn close enough with a circular saw if you just take your time. So circular saw, excellent way to go. Another thing you'll want is a jigsaw. So here's a jigsaw. This uses the same battery system that the circular saw uses. So I can interchange batteries between them very easily. It's a very, very great tool. You'll need this for odder cuts and when you start cutting up plywood for your tabletop. A jigsaw like this is definitely the way you'll want to go. And finally, the most important tool is going to be a power drill, something like this. This is, I've had this for many, many years. One of the very first power tools I ever purchased. It uses the same battery system that the other two use. So, I've bought into the Ryobi ecosystem and it works really great for me. It doesn't have to be Ryobi brand, but a really good one of these, a really hefty, big one of these is going to be what you kind of want. They'll last you for years, and they're really great. Some other tools to kind of make your life a little bit easier. This is like a quick, I don't know what it's called, it's like a quick chuck or something. Essentially what you do is you put this in the front, and you are able to very quickly switch between, say, a drill bit or your little screwdriver head here. And being able to switch back and forth so quickly, it's going to make your life so much easier. Building benchwork can really slow down if you have to undo your drill bit, put in your screw, and then just it becomes kind of a pain in the butt. And you don't want your building benchwork to be a pain in the butt for you. Of course, you'll want a pencil for marking lines, as well as tape measure, a good tape measure, very important there. I think one of these squares, these right angle kind of square tools here are absolutely essential. You can get really great straight lines with something like this, really good measurement, really good 45-degree angles as well, because you'll find in some cases you'll want it to have some 45-degree angles, so you can get really good measurements on this. And of course, having a level is a necessity as well. Model railroading benchwork needs to be level, because if it's off a little bit, you're going to know the first time you put some boxcars on your track and it just rolls right off the end of the table. So having a level, absolutely essential. Fastening everything together, all your wood together. Wood glue is excellent. You'll want a lot of this. This is a small bottle. Get yourself a big bottle. You'll be using a lot of wood glue. As well as screws. I use drywall screws. They make wood screws, and wood screws are really soft. I always have problems stripping the head of the wood screw. and then just not wanting to drive in all the way very cleanly. But drywall screws are the way to go. Standard drywall screw for me is going to be a 1 5/8 inch screw that is just big enough to be able to hold the wood together well, but not too big where risk starting to split wood, that kind of thing. You'll want to switch to like a 1 1/4 inch screw when you are fastening your plywood top to your benchwork. We'll get into that in a bit. And then the final thing you need is actually the wood itself that you're going to be building your benchwork out of. Some people swear by the 2x4 board. That is way overdoing it. With model railroading, we tend to overdo our benchwork anyway. I don't know what it is. We build our benchwork to withstand, earthquakes and the end of the world. And you don't necessarily need to do that. Really, the heaviest thing your benchwork is going to hold up is going to be the benchwork itself. And a 2x4 is not only more expensive, but it also is it's heavier, it's harder to work with. It creates rock solid benchwork, but man, it does not need to be this thick. So I use a 1x3 board for mine. 1x3 I think is the perfect size for a model railroad. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's not going to kind of bend and bow on you the way maybe a smaller size wood might. So perfect size for model railroad benchwork I think is the 1x3. Now when it comes to grade of wood, there are several different grades of wood out there. If you go to, and I don't know the names of them, but if you go to your Lowe's, your Menards, or whatever your hardware store is going to be, and you start looking at the wood that they have available, you're going to find cheap wood, more expensive wood, and then like really expensive wood out there, right? So when it comes to pine, there's like cheap and then there's kind of expensive wood. Cheap wood is going to work perfectly fine for a model railroad. It doesn't need to be amazing, awesome wood. What you do need to do though, when you are checking, when you're looking at your boards, is you're going to want to make sure your boards are straight. So as you pull the board out of the stack, kind of sight down it. Is it bending a little bit? Is it looking pretty darn straight? Take a look at that board and make sure that board is as straight as possible. It's going to be way easier on you when you're building your benchwork, knowing that you are starting with straight wood. A lot of wood these days kind of curves and bows a little bit, especially on the cheaper wood. So take your time, go through the stack of wood and find the straightest boards you can. The boards I used on my model railroad were the more expensive kind. A couple of reasons for that. Most of them having to do with the whole straightness of the board. The more expensive wood you're going to have, the better, the straighter the boards are, and so just the easier overall. And for me, this is a model railroad that needs to last me basically until I die. So I wanted to make sure that I had good quality lumber, as straight as possible. Now you're paying for it. You're paying twice as much, or maybe even a little bit more, when you do that. But you do get, you do get a better quality. You do get your money's worth out of it, I feel. So that's that. So 1x3s, really great kind of base. I also use 1x2s in certain locations for certain reasons. So 1x2s is the same quality lumber. Excellent way to go there. And then plywood. Now with plywood, there are different qualities of plywood as well. You can spend more on plywood and get a better quality plywood piece out of it. The one thing you want to look for with plywood is the thickness and the numbers of ply that go with the plywood. Plywood tends to have, it tends to sort of bend and bow under different humidities. So if it's a thinner plywood, you're going to get a lot more bowing. If it has less ply, you're going to get a lot more bowing too. And you don't want to get it on your model railroad and then just to have it kind of bow and distort itself and get kind of, you don't want that bowing look on your plywood. It's not going to be great to run trains on. So the size of the plywood helps prevent this bowing as well. So a lot of people will recommend 3/4 inch plywood. 3/4 inch plywood is great. It's very heavy. Plywood is very, very heavy. And so if you're doing something like I'm doing here where you're suspended your benchwork up off of the ground, you may want to consider a more lightweight plywood. If you're making a portable model railroad that you have to move one day, more lightweight plywood is going to be something you want to take a look at. Plywoods can be very, very heavy, and a 3/4 inch plywood certainly is very, very heavy. So 1/4 inch plywood I think is a little too light. That's when you start to get into that problem of it bowing and really becoming an issue after a certain amount of time. So I went kind of in between. I went with 1/2 inch plywood, 5 ply, a good quality plywood as well. And even though I spent a little bit of extra money to get the good quality plywood at a pretty good thickness, I did find it did bow a little bit. I got the flattest, straightest pieces I could from the store, and when I brought it into my basement, it did get a little bit of bowing. So what I recommend with plywood, I also recommend the same thing with masonite hardboard, and really any kind of board that you end up purchasing. It's always a good idea. Is to bring it into the location where you're going to build your benchwork and just let it sit for a while, a week, maybe even more, and let it sort of acclimate to the environment that it's going to be in. You know, basements tend to be a little bit wetter than, say, a hardware store, and so what might be kind of straight and perfect in a hardware store takes on a slightly different shape once you get it into the basement, especially things like plywood. And if you can kind of allow it to sort of adjust itself to your humidity in your room that you're going to be building your model railroad, once you start to assemble that benchwork, there's less movement once you kind of cut things up and glue things together and all that kind of stuff, if that makes sense. Okay, so I think we've talked about kind of all the tools that you'll need. Oh, the last thing I just talk about is these clamps right here. These are really great, especially if you're building your benchwork by yourself and you don't have anyone to help you out. You can very easily, you know, secure things together so that you have basically a second pair of hands if you are needing to kind of clamp things together before you start to screw things together, that kind of thing. I find that I use these quite often, and so these for me have been very, very valuable. I wouldn't say they're necessary, but if you're building it by yourself, having this extra set of hands or something to kind of clamp things together while it's gluing and drying, something like this is absolutely excellent. So let's take a look at, so here's a little secret. I before I decided I was going to start to do a how-to series of videos, I was just kind of putting like all of my my construction and stuff like that in my kind of my layout construction video series, my layout update series. So I've completed the benchwork in my room, so I really don't have anything else to build at this point to show you kind of building techniques. But what I do have is old footage of me building some basic open grid benchwork. So I will cut to that. We'll take a look at that footage, and then we'll come back here and I'll show you some areas of the model railroad where I've used this technique or variations of this technique to build some things that I think you might find useful. So we'll take a look at that footage and we'll come right back. When cutting your wood, it is important that you get it right the first time because you don't get a second shot at it, right? So we've heard the term measure twice, cut once, and that's exactly what we're going to do here today. So what I like to do when I'm measuring out my wood is to measure out the length that I want to make a cut. Let's say 13 inches on here. And let's go ahead and make a mark, all right? And then I like to come a little bit further down on the piece of wood here and make a second mark. So I have one mark here and one mark here. Now, this is the point where I go back in here with my square and I line it up with the base of the wood here, and I line it up with these two marks. And then I can draw my line right across there, and it lines up perfectly with these two marks, and so I know I've got a nice straight line at the right spot, and I can go ahead and make my cut. When I am making my cut, I want to be very, very careful that I am aligning my blade with the line very well. I'm taking my time with this just to make sure that I got everything right, and once I know that I've got it lined up well, let's go ahead and make the cut. Okay. And it's just as easy as that. What I've done is I've measured the wall, and I have determined that I measured the studs in the wall, and I've determined the studs are 16 inches apart. Check to make sure that that is the case in your walls. They're supposed to be 16 inches in most walls. Some people go as wide as 24 inches. So just check to make sure that your stud spacing is correct. This isn't necessary if you're going to be building legs for your layout, but because I'm attaching mine directly to the wall, I want to make sure that all of my spacing in my benchwork matches the stud spacing in the wall, so that when I attach these brackets right there, I can attach them to these cross braces just like that. All right, so simply take screw it into the board. Seems pretty simple, right? A couple of quick tips if you're new to this. Drill yourself a pilot hole first. And I know it takes just a little bit more time to do, and you're thinking, well, why would I need to do that? I can just screw right into the board. These screws will split the board, okay? And you don't want to do that, because when you split a board, you're ruining its structural integrity. It's not going to hold very well. So just take the extra time, drill in a pilot hole. I'm using a 3/32 inch drill bit. It's smaller than the diameter of the screw. Make sure you do that. That way you have plenty of wood left for the screw to kind of lock itself into. So let's go ahead and drill a couple of holes. I've already pre-measured everything, so I'm just going to make sure everything lines up nicely. Don't have to go super far in, just far enough to kind of clear most of that screw. This is where having that quick lock thing is really nice, because then you can pop that in there and then you can begin to screw in. Now, one thing, I don't think that this is absolutely necessary, but I do like to add a little bit of wood glue in these sections here, just to hold them even more in place. Keeps everything from kind of wiggling, if that makes sense. You know, screws can kind of sometimes loosen up a little bit over time, and the wood glue just helps to kind of keep everything together a little bit better. You don't need a lot, just a little bit, just a little bead. Come on. This is almost empty, so it is not. There we go. Okay. And then it's the only bad thing about wood glue is it does tend to make things a little bit more messy. And that is it. Just take a look at it real quick, make sure everything's kind of lining up well enough. And if there's any glue that kind of squirts out of it, kind of wipe that up a little bit so you're not sticking your wood to your tabletop. And you're done with that one, and you're ready to move on to the next. Pretty simple, but what you're going to get is you're going to get really solid construction. And here we are for the finished benchwork for this scene. As you can see, the open grid benchwork has been attached to the wall, and I've laid some plywood up on top of that. And what I did was, basically with the plywood, is I secured it as solidly as I could. Anywhere where I could drill in a screw, I did. And this just helps encourage the plywood to lay straight and prevent potential warping that may occur. I'm using what's called a cookie cutter method of sub-road bed with this plywood, which means that only areas that really need it get the plywood. So areas where there's going to be track work laid out, has plywood laid below it. But any area that's going to have scenery like this area right in here, there's no need for the plywood itself. And so just to save on weight and to save on material costs, I have left plywood off of that area there. Well, we've arrived at a kind of an interesting spot on my model railroad. This is going to be a very scenic section of the layout. And what's great about open grid benchwork, which you can see kind of laid out in front of you right here, is you don't have to lay track exactly on it. You can lower, in this case, the benchwork down a little bit and suspend the track work kind of on these stilts above in order to give you a little bit of room to play. Very rarely in the real world is track just kind of on a flat, plateau of perfectly flat landscape. Even in the plains where I live, you'll find that track is often much higher than the ground around it for reasons of erosion or rising river or creeks. You want to keep your track kind of up above all of that, and so you'll often get areas where the track is very much up on a grade. So I may have mountains that kind of extend down here, but it doesn't just stop at a flat plane where the track is. That mountain would continue down below the track work as well. And so by lowering your bench work down, raising your track above the bottom of the bench work on these kind of risers here, you give yourself, in this case, I've got maybe about 3 inches of room to play with some very interesting scenery in this spot. So that's the great thing about open bench work, is it's not just like a tabletop in which to stick track and run trains, but it can be used to, it has lots of flexibility, and you can really create some kind of interesting scenic shapes using something as simple as open grid bench work. When it comes to creating sub-road bed, this would be basically the wood that holds up your road bed, in this case cork, and then your track work, which goes up over top of it. There's a few different techniques for creating sub-road bed. I personally like the cookie cutter method. It's the simplest that I've been able to find, and it allows for a great deal of flexibility. What cookie cutter means is kind of like a cookie cutter where you're just cutting out the parts that you want to make your cookies, whether it be a little gingerbread man or a tree or whatever it may end up being. Very similar way with plywood, you're just cutting out the areas where you absolutely need that sub-road bed, that area to kind of hold up the models around it. And then when it comes time to add scenery, this is going to be stuff that you don't necessarily need to have that plywood down for. All the plywood would be really doing at that point would be just making everything kind of heavier overall, and so it's not really needed. So in this case right here, I have sub-road bed. This is this plywood, this is this 1/2 inch plywood, just below the road bed itself, and this is about 2 3/4 inches wide, so it's just wide enough for the road bed. If I need to come back in here and shave off a little bit more later on so I can get a nice gentle slope off of the road bed into the scenery that goes around it, I certainly can. But a good size for that. And then anything that needs a larger amount of plywood, such as areas where there's industry and maybe more complicated track work, you can use a larger piece of plywood there. And in this case, these is 2 pieces of plywood that have been glued and screwed together in order to create this large plateau, if you will, in which to build my industry out on. Areas in between where I'm going to have like a little dip in the scenery right here, I don't need plywood for this. And so what this does is it lightens everything up, but it also encourages you to put a little more variation in your scenery. If you take a look at the real world, I live in Illinois, so there's lots of flat land and farm fields, but even still, in kind of like the plains area of the United States, nothing is ever really perfectly flat. Around train tracks you have gullies and you have ditches for water runoff, erosion purposes, and just the natural undulation of the landscape. And nothing is ever really perfectly flat. And so, by only putting plywood in areas where you're going to need to have it absolutely flat, it encourages you, once you get around to actually making the scenery itself, to experiment and play a little bit more with your scenery, to make it a little more natural in the way that it kind of flows and meets with your roads and your track work and your industries. There are different ways to elevate your model railroad above the floor. You can use legs, or you can do what I did and use some kind of brackets to hang it off of the wall. I'm creating a permanent layout, so for me, I like the look of a suspended model railroad, and that's what I wanted to create for my own. For the most of the model railroad, I use these kind of metal brackets that I found at Menards for a few dollars a piece. They do a really good job of holding up the model railroad, and they're pretty strong as well. However, for this section here, this was a very wide section, and I couldn't find metal brackets that were large enough that I felt was going to hold up well over time, and so I built my own. These are built out of 1x4 pieces of wood that had been screwed into the stud in the wall. Very important to screw that in the stud in the wall. And then they are supported by this 1x3 piece of wood that has been cut at a 45-degree angle and then glued and screwed from the back into this section here. Very important that you make sure that if you're going to do this, that this area right here is a perfect 90-degree angle. That's going to be really important to make sure that your benchwork stays nice and straight on top of this, and you don't have issues with cars rolling off at the end of it. What I may end up doing is going back here and creating some additional kind of webbing supports in this area right here, just to encourage it to maintain its shape. I think once I start putting some plaster scenery on top of this, it might get a little heavy, and so by adding that additional webbing, it might help to just kind of encourage it to keep from bending and tilting forward a little bit. Suspending your model railroad off the wall is a great great look for a model railroad, but you may be in situations where you can't do that, or don't prefer to do that, and that's where having legs to elevate your model railroad are really great. So I'm in an area in the basement here where I have cement walls, and so securing the model railroad into those walls was going to be a little difficult. I didn't really want to drill into the cement, so what I decided to do instead was build some legs here. Now, there are different ways of building legs. Some people like to use 2x2s in order to build their legs. These are very strong. They're going to do really good, solid job for legs. They can be a little bit expensive, so if you're building something larger than like a 4x8 foot layout, you might want to try a little bit of a different technique. For my model railroad, what I chose to do was take 1x3s, just like what I've been using in the rest of the room, and attach them in an L shape here, and then glue and screw those together. And what you do is you create a very solid leg that doesn't want to bend or warp in either direction. It kind of holds itself nice and straight. That, in combination with these angled braces here that are secured into the layout itself, and I've got legs that are very solid that don't want to move at all. It's very important that you have lots of good bracing with your legs, because what your legs are going to want to do, especially if you're leaning against it or kind of moving it around the room a little bit or putting weight on it, the legs take a lot of that weight off of the railroad and straight into the leg itself, and so they're going to want to kind of loosen up over time. And when a model railroad kind of gets a little bit loose over time, it starts to wobble a little bit when you are kind of walking around the room or accidentally putting weight on it, it's not a good look, or it doesn't feel good to have a layout that kind of wobbles around a little bit on you. So taking your time with the legs, making sure they are absolutely rock solid and very secure, very well braced in multiple directions, will ensure that the layout itself remains very sturdy. Now, the bottoms of these legs are kind of interesting, so I'm going to take the camera and I'll show you what those look like right now. Okay, we're in kind of an awkward spot, and I haven't vacuumed, so mind the dust, but here's the bottom of one of the legs. You can see the 1x3s that kind of come together in this L shape. But once I get down here in the bottom, I've attached it to a small piece of 2x2 wood here. And this is so that I can get good support for what's down in here, which is, this is a foot that is drilled into the bottom of this 2x2 that is adjustable. I can kind of screw it in, screw it out to lengthen or shrinking that foot up a little bit. And doing so allows me to adjust the height of the benchwork just a little bit, so I can make sure the very top of the benchwork is nice and flat so I don't have cars rolling away from me. Now, this foot needed to be just slightly longer, and so what I did was I took a small shim here and placed it below this foot just to make sure that it's
secured to the ground a little bit and is not going to move on me anywhere. And you can see that's really solid. It's really on there very well. But having these adjustable feet, I think, are very, very important for a model railroad, just to make sure that your top of your benchwork is as flat as absolutely possible.
This is kind of an interesting section of my model railroad here. I've got essentially two different open grid kind of benchwork pieces that have been stuck together. One large one on the back here for my staging tracks, which will go behind my backdrop, and then one that has been lowered down here, which will support the scenery that goes below a nice bridge scene that I'm going to have here. This is a pretty large sort of distance between my track work and the base of the river, essentially, and so I wanted to have benchwork that was much, much lower here, but it didn't need to be so low back here behind my backdrop. And so these are basically two different open grid boxes that I've separated from each other, and then you can use, you know, pieces of wood to connect those together, and just as long as you do it so that it's strong and nothing moves on you, you're going to be in really good shape. So this just kind of shows off how flexible this style of benchwork can really be. Just takes a little bit of imagination, and yeah, you can get really good results from something like this. You can see here in sections where two pieces of plywood are being joined together. This is one piece, this is another piece. I've used a third piece of plywood here, glued it heavily, and then placed it on the bottom of these two pieces of plywood, and then with a good number of screws attached those separate pieces of plywood to this third piece of plywood here. And in doing so, it helps ensure that the connection between those two pieces remain flat. They don't tend to want to buckle when you do something like that. And that's a good way to create a very permanent and very secure connection between two separate pieces of plywood. And you'll see that throughout the layout. Another thing I did was I run my bus lines straight through these pieces of wood here, drilling a hole for each one of these that I can then run my bus line through, and keeps the wiring from hanging down low below the track work, keeps it nice and tidy, and works really well. That's all for today, folks. Thanks for coming along with me on this adventure, taking a look at the different tools and techniques that I use for building model railroad benchwork, and hopefully you got something out of it. This is a little bit of a weird video, I fully admit. If I would have thought about doing these how-to videos as I was building the layout, I would have done a little bit of a better job capturing the build process at that time. So this is kind of like after the fact, kind of taking a look at what I did. But hopefully it gave you some inspiration and some ideas as you are designing the benchwork for your own model railroad. Really all this is these are pretty simple techniques, and I'm just kind of making adjustments to it here and there so that it fits my personal needs for my layout. And your layout, I'm sure, will be different than mine. But hopefully you got something from this video. I highly encourage everyone to take a look at other videos for building benchwork. There's a lot of really good ones out there on YouTube that can give you really good ideas as well. Take a look at the magazines and other hobby press for great ideas for building benchwork as well. That's where I got all my ideas, and all the techniques that I applied to this model railroad were found there as well. So again, thanks for stopping by and checking out my video, and hopefully you got something out of it. And if you did, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you all in the next video.